16 hours. That is the time between an act of war and an act of profound humanity. On the vast, indifferent expanse of the South Atlantic, a single decision by one man will momentarily blur the lines of conflict, creating a fragile bubble of compassion in the heart of total war. But will this extraordinary act be met with understanding, or will it be shattered by the brutal logic of battle, leaving behind a legacy of both heroism and infamy? It is September 12, 1942. The Second World War rages across continents and oceans, and in the unforgiving waters off the west coast of Africa, a German U-boat prowls. At its helm is Korvettenkapitän Werner Hartenstein, commander of U-156. Born in Plauen, Germany, on February 27, 1908, Hartenstein joined the Reichsmarine in 1928, serving on torpedo boats during the Spanish Civil War before transferring to the U-boat service in 1941. He is a seasoned officer, having already earned the Iron Cross First and Second Class, and the German Cross in Gold for his successful patrols. Werner Hartenstein is not just a successful U-boat commander. He is a man steeped in the traditional maritime code of the sea, a code that often dictated aid to fellow sailors in distress, regardless of nationality. This deeply ingrained sense of honor, often at odds with the escalating brutality of the war, makes Hartenstein an unusual figure in the Kriegsmarine. His U-156, a Type IXC submarine, is on its fourth war patrol, having already sunk significant Allied shipping. The vessel he now targets is the RMS Laconia, a British passenger liner converted into an armed troopship, sailing alone, approximately 130 miles north-northeast of Ascension Island. This region, far from major naval bases, is a vital but isolated artery for Allied convoys, making it a hunting ground for German U-boats. The Laconia, though a legitimate military target due to its conversion and armaments, carries a complex human cargo: 463 crew members, 286 British soldiers, 103 Polish guards, 80 civilians including women and children, and critically, 1,793 Italian prisoners of war. In total, 2,732 souls are on board. Unbeknownst to Werner Hartenstein, his next action will ignite a chain of events that will challenge the very definition of warfare and humanity. The vastness of the South Atlantic, a seemingly empty expanse, hides inherent dangers for any U-boat operating far from home. U-156's days, even weeks, from any friendly port, its fuel and torpedoes finite, its crew vulnerable to the elements and the constant threat of Allied air and naval patrols. Command skepticism is a silent, ever-present pressure. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, the commander-in-chief of U-boats, demands aggressive action against Allied shipping. Humanitarian concerns, while not explicitly forbidden, are secondary to the primary mission of sinking enemy vessels and returning safely. The institutional resistance to anything that might jeopardize a U-boat is immense. These submarines are a precious resource, their crews highly trained and irreplaceable. On the night of September 12, 1942, Werner Hartenstein executes his duty with precision. At approximately 10 p.m., U-156 fires 2 torpedoes into the RMS Laconia. The explosions rip through the British liner, 130 miles north of Ascension Island. The Laconia immediately transmits an SSS distress signal, indicating an attack by submarine, along with its position: 04 degrees 34 minutes south, 11 degrees 25 minutes west. Within an hour, at 11:23 p.m., the ship begins to sink, disappearing beneath the waves. Werner Hartenstein, following standard procedure, surfaces U-156, intending to interrogate the ship's senior officers for intelligence. But what he finds in the water is not the typical scene of a torpedoed merchantman. The darkness is filled with the screams of thousands, a cacophony of languages: English, Polish, and, surprisingly, Italian. As his crew scans the wreckage with searchlights, the grim reality unfolds. Hundreds of terrified civilians, women, and children, alongside British and Polish soldiers, and a vast number of Italian prisoners of war, Germany's allies, are struggling for their lives in the oil-slicked ocean. The sight forces an immediate, profound moral dilemma upon Werner Hartenstein. The traditional naval custom of assisting survivors, a code of conduct that transcends nationality, clashes violently with the brutal necessities of total submarine warfare. His U-boat is a war machine, not a rescue vessel. Taking on hundreds of survivors would compromise his submarine's ability to dive, making it a vulnerable target for any passing Allied aircraft or warship. It would consume precious space, food, and water, potentially endangering his own 53-man crew. No one in his position would expect him to do what he is about to do. The risks are immense, the potential consequences catastrophic. Yet, as he gazes at the faces of the terrified women and children, and the desperate Italian prisoners, Werner Hartenstein realizes he is their only hope. He, the man who sank their ship, must now attempt to save their lives. The decision is made. Werner Hartenstein immediately orders his crew to begin rescue operations. U-156 stops dead in the water, its mission shifting from hunter to rescuer. German sailors, trained for combat, now extend hands to pull drowning strangers from the sea. They distribute food, water, and rudimentary first aid. The submarine's deck, designed for only 53 crewmen, is soon crammed with nearly 200 survivors, including 5 women. 4 lifeboats, salvaged from the wreck and severely overloaded, are rigged for towing, holding an additional 200 people. At 1:25 a.m. on September 13, just hours after the sinking, Werner Hartenstein sends a coded radio message to the Befehlshaber der U-Boot (BDU), the German U-boat command, detailing the situation. He reports, "Sunk by Hartenstein, British Laconia. Unfortunately with 1,500 Italian POWs. 90 fished out of the water so far. Request orders." He explicitly suggests a diplomatic neutralization of the area to facilitate an effective rescue. Admiral Karl Donitz, head of U-boat operations, receives the message. His initial reaction is one of calculated risk and, surprisingly, humanitarianism. He immediately orders 7 U-boats from the Eisbar Wolfpack, which had been preparing for an attack on Cape Town, to divert to the Laconia's position to assist in the rescue. This is an unprecedented move, sacrificing a strategic offensive for a rescue mission. Donitz then informs Berlin of his actions. However, Hitler, upon hearing of the situation, is reportedly furious and orders the rescue to be abandoned. Admiral Erich Raeder, commander-in-chief of the Kriegsmarine, overrides Donitz's order, directing the Eisbar boats, including U-156, to disengage and proceed to their original Cape Town mission. However, Raeder also orders U-506, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Erich Werdmann, U-507, under Korvettenkapitän Harro Schacht, and the Italian submarine Comandante Capellini to intercept Hartenstein's U-156, take on its survivors, and then proceed to the Laconia site to rescue any remaining Italians. Meanwhile, Werner Hartenstein makes an even more audacious move. At 6 a.m. on September 13, he broadcasts an uncoded message in English on international distress frequencies to all shipping in the area. The message declares, "If any ship will assist the shipwrecked Laconia crew, I will not attack her, providing I am not being attacked by ship or air force. I picked up 193 men. 4 degrees minus 53 inches south, 11 degrees minus 26 inches west. German submarine. This is an extraordinary gamble." He is openly revealing his position and vulnerability to his enemies, hoping for a humanitarian response. To further emphasize his peaceful intentions, his crew improvises a large Red Cross flag from white bedsheets, painting a red cross on it, and drapes it prominently over the submarine's gun deck. The message is intercepted by a British station in Freetown, Sierra Leone. However, British command, suspecting a ruse of war, disregards the plea. Days pass. U-156 remains on the surface, a beacon of improbable compassion in a war-torn ocean, its decks crowded with men, women, and children of enemy nations. Werner Hartenstein and his crew continue to care for the survivors, a testament to a code of conduct that, for a brief time, transcends the conflict. On September 15, U-506 and U-507 arrive, followed by the Italian submarine Comandante Capellini. U-506 takes on 151 survivors, including 9 women and children. U-507 rescues 491 people, among them 15 women and 16 children. The submarines, now heavily laden, begin moving west, intending to rendezvous with Vichy French warships dispatched from Dakar. The cruiser *Glory* and the sloops Dumont d'Urville and Annamite. The sheer weight of numbers, the cramped conditions, and the ever-present fear of detection create an almost unbearable tension. The German and Italian submariners, whose primary training is to destroy, are now acting as medics and caretakers, sharing their limited provisions with their former enemies. The human cost of the Laconia sinking is already immense. Between 1,658 and 1,757 people have died, the majority of them Italian prisoners of war. The survivors in the lifeboats and on the submarines face exposure, thirst, and starvation if rescue does not arrive soon. If you had been one of the German or Italian submariners, ordered to risk your life and your vessel for the survivors of a ship you had just sunk, would you have followed that order, knowing the dangers it posed? Tell me in the comments. On September 16, 1942, at 11:25 a.m., the fragile peace of the rescue mission is shattered. An American B-24 Liberator bomber, flying from a secret airbase on Ascension Island, spots U-156 on the surface. The submarine is clearly displaying a large Red Cross flag. Its deck is crowded with people, and 4 lifeboats, packed with survivors, trail behind. Lieutenant James Harden, the B-24 pilot, circles the U-boat for 30 minutes. Werner Hartenstein's crew signals frantically in Morse code, requesting assistance. A British Royal Air Force officer, a survivor on U-156's deck, also radios the plane. RAF officer speaking from German submarine. Laconia survivors on board, soldiers, civilians, women, children. However, the British in Freetown had dismissed Hartenstein's earlier open broadcast as a possible trap. A garbled, incomplete message later reached the Americans, implying the Laconia had just been sunk and making no mention of German involvement in a rescue or a ceasefire. Lieutenant Harden's report reaches Captain Robert C. Richardson III, the American airbase commander on Ascension Island. Richardson and his staff are wary. 2 of their aircraft had been fired upon by U-boats just the day before. The idea of a German U-boat openly engaged in rescue, broadcasting its position, seems too convenient, too suspicious. They believe it could be a ruse to lure Allied ships or planes into an ambush. The Red Cross flag is dismissed as a potential deception. From their perspective, a German submarine, regardless of its current activity, remains a legitimate enemy target, especially if it might be gathering intelligence or preparing for further attacks. Captain Richardson issues a direct order: sink sub. He believes he is preventing a potential threat, unaware of the full humanitarian scope of the situation unfolding below. At 12:32 p.m., Lieutenant Harden returns. The survivors in the lifeboats, who had initially felt a surge of hope at the sight of the Allied aircraft, now watch in horror. The B-24 drops bombs and depth charges. One bomb explodes just 10 feet from a lifeboat, killing dozens of survivors instantly. Others straddle U-156, causing minor damage to its hull. The concussive blasts toss people in lifeboats into the water. Werner Hartenstein, facing an impossible choice, acts to save his crew and his damaged submarine. He orders the tow lines to the remaining lifeboats cut. He then orders all survivors on U-156's deck into the water. The submarine submerges slowly, giving those on deck a chance to get into the ocean without being pulled under. Lieutenant Harden, seeing U-156 dive, mistakenly believes he has sunk the German U-boat and reports his success. He and his crew are later awarded air medals for bravery. The attack is a devastating blow to the rescue effort. Dozens who had survived the Laconia's sinking now perish in the bombing and strafing runs. The remaining U-boats, U-506 and U-507, unaware of the attack on U-156, continue their rescue operations. They receive a message from German headquarters, confirming the attack on U-156 and requesting the number of survivors they hold. U-507 reports 491 survivors, including 15 women and 16 children. U-506 reports 151 survivors, including 9 women and children. The order to attack a vessel engaged in a rescue, clearly displaying Red Cross flags, becomes a pivotal moment in the war. The immediate consequence is a catastrophic loss of life and a profound shift in German U-boat policy. Which side of this story do you think history got wrong? Tell me in the comments. The remaining U-boats and the Italian submarine continue their journey, shepherding their precious cargo of survivors toward the rendezvous point with the Vichy French ships. The journey is fraught with peril. The South Atlantic remains an active war zone, and the sight of U-boats on the surface, even with Red Cross markings, makes them vulnerable. The fear of another aerial attack is palpable among both the rescuers and the rescued. The shared trauma, however, forges an unlikely bond. German sailors, in moments of quiet, speak with British and Polish soldiers, and Italian prisoners, about their families, their homes. The commonality of their humanity, stripped bare by the ocean's indifference, temporarily overshadows the nationalistic fervor of the war. The French cruiser *Glory* and the sloops Annamite and Dumont d'Urville are steaming towards the designated coordinates. The Vichy French government, while collaborating with the Axis powers, maintains a degree of autonomy and, in this instance, agrees to participate in the humanitarian effort. Their arrival is delayed, however, by the vast distances of the Atlantic and the inherent difficulties of coordinating such a complex operation in wartime. On the morning of September 17, as the sun rises over the endless ocean, the French ships finally appear on the horizon. A sense of immense relief washes over the exhausted survivors. The transfer is painstaking, taking hours as hundreds of people are moved from the cramped submarines and lifeboats to the larger French vessels. The Glory * takes on 597 British survivors, including 48 women and children, along with 373 Italians and 70 Poles. The Annamite receives additional Italian prisoners. The Comandante Capellini transfers its survivors, with the exception of 6 Italian and 2 British officers, to the * Dumont d'Urville. The rescued are weak, dehydrated, and many suffer from exposure. Medical teams on the French ships work tirelessly to provide care. The Italian POWs are eventually transported to Dakar, arriving on September 24, 1942. The British and Polish survivors are eventually taken to Casablanca and other ports. The sheer scale of the rescue, despite the American attack, is a testament to the initial, shared humanitarian impulse. Of the 2,732 people originally on board the Laconia, only 1,113 ultimately survive. The attack by the B-24 bomber directly contributes to a significant portion of the casualties, beyond the initial torpedoing. Back at German U-boat command, the news of the American attack on a clearly marked rescue operation sparks outrage. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, infuriated by what he perceives as a blatant violation of the laws of war, issues new orders on September 17, 1942. This directive, known as the Laconia Order, or Trident Null, fundamentally changes the conduct of German submarine warfare. The order is unambiguous. 1. All attempts at rescuing members of ships that have been sunk, including attempts to pick up persons swimming, or to place them in lifeboats, or attempts to upright capsized boats, or to supply provisions or water, are to cease. The rescue of survivors contradicts the elementary necessity of war for the destruction of enemy ships and crews. 2. The order for the seizure of commanding officers and chief engineers remains in force. 3. Survivors are only to be picked up in cases when their interrogation would be of value to the U-boat. 4. Be severe. Remember that in his bombing attacks on German cities the enemy has no regard for women and children. This order, born directly from the Laconia incident, effectively ends humanitarian rescue attempts by German U-boats for the remainder of the war. While Donitz later states that the order was intended to protect his submarines from air attacks while on the surface, and not to kill survivors, its wording is ambiguous and chilling. Despite the new directive, some German U-boat commanders continue to provide aid to survivors when possible, often in secret. What does it tell you about a man that he made that choice with everything to lose? Tell me in the comments. Werner Hartenstein, for his extraordinary actions during the Laconia rescue, receives the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross on September 17, 1942. It is a recognition of his service and, implicitly, his leadership during the crisis, even as the larger implications of the incident reverberate through naval commands. The award comes on the very day Donitz issues the order that negates the very spirit of Hartenstein's actions. The irony is stark. U-156, damaged but operational, resumes its patrol. The crew, having witnessed both the depths of human suffering and the heights of unexpected compassion, now grapples with the new reality of the Laconia order. The memory of the crowded deck, the faces of the women and children, the shared humanity, stands in stark contrast to the grim directive from headquarters. The U-boat continues its operations, a silent hunter once more. On September 19, U-156 encounters another British ship, the Quebec City Asterisk, approximately 800 nautical miles south of Freetown. Werner Hartenstein, operating submerged, fires a single torpedo, sinking the merchant vessel. This time, after surfacing, he approaches the lifeboats and, adhering to the new orders, only asks the survivors for the ship's name before departing, leaving them to their fate. The chilling efficiency of war has reasserted itself. The incident at the Laconia site has far-reaching consequences, extending beyond the immediate loss of life and the controversial Laconia order. The events expose a fundamental clash between traditional naval ethics and the escalating brutality of total war, particularly the unchecked power of air forces operating without full intelligence. The lack of clear communication and the presumption of hostile intent by the American aircrew transform a humanitarian effort into a tragedy. The survivors of the Laconia, scattered across the vast ocean, face a desperate struggle. Those abandoned by U-156 after the B-24 attack are left to the mercy of the elements. Many perish from exposure, thirst, and shark attacks. The story of those who clung to life in open lifeboats for weeks, their numbers dwindling day by day, becomes a harrowing tale of endurance against unimaginable odds. One lifeboat, originally carrying 31 occupants, is sighted weeks later in late October. Only 4 survivors remain. Their ordeal highlights the sheer brutality of survival at sea in wartime. The decision made by Captain Richardson on Ascension Island, to attack a vessel clearly engaged in rescue, would be intensely scrutinized long after the war. The chain of command, the intelligence received, or not received, and the interpretation of the rules of engagement are all called into question. The incident becomes a stark case study in the complexities and moral ambiguities of modern warfare. It is September 16, 1942. The South Atlantic sun beats down relentlessly on the scene. U-156, its deck a temporary refugee camp, drifts slowly, surrounded by 4 overloaded lifeboats. The improvised Red Cross flag flutters above the conning tower, a stark white rectangle against the battleship gray, its crimson symbol a plea for neutrality. Inside the U-boat, below decks, 5 women and several injured men huddle in the cramped compartments, their faces etched with exhaustion and terror. On the foredeck, nearly 200 souls, a mix of British, Polish, and Italian, civilian and military, share a fragile, silent understanding with their German captors turned rescuers. Werner Hartenstein stands on the bridge, his eyes scanning the endless horizon, searching for the promised French ships, or perhaps, any sign of a truly neutral rescue vessel. Then, the distant drone. A low, persistent hum that grows louder, faster. It is a B-24 Liberator, Lieutenant James Harden at the controls, banking sharply, its 4 engines roaring. The plane makes a wide circle, its shadow passing over the U-boat, over the lifeboats. Werner Hartenstein raises his binoculars, his expression grim. He sees the plane clearly. He orders the radio operator to signal again, to flash the message in Morse code. German submarine with English survivors. Is there a rescue ship in sight? The British RAF officer on deck shouts his message through a megaphone, his words carried on the wind. Laconia survivors on board, soldiers, civilians, women, children. The B-24 continues to circle, an ominous bird of prey. 30 minutes crawl by, each second laden with dread. The survivors on deck look up, some waving, some clutching children, hope and fear warring in their eyes. The German crew members on the bridge, armed but not threatening, watch the plane, their hands instinctively tightening on their weapons, ready for the worst, but hoping for the best. Werner Hartenstein maintains his composure, a stoic figure against the backdrop of the unfolding drama. He has made his intentions clear. He has offered a ceasefire. He has displayed the universal symbol of humanitarian aid. The B-24 banks again, then turns, aligning itself. The drone intensifies to a thunderous roar. It is coming in low. Too low for observation. Too fast for a friendly pass. The air chills. Werner Hartenstein's eyes narrow. This is not a rescue. This is an attack. He shouts orders. Alarm. Prepare to dive. But there is no time. The Liberator is already directly overhead. The first bombs fall, whistling through the air. A deafening explosion erupts near the stern. Water columns erupt, drenching the deck, rocking the submarine violently. One bomb detonates terrifyingly close to a lifeboat, packed with men and women, tearing it apart in a spray of wood and flesh. Dozens are killed instantly. Screams of agony pierce the air, now mingled with the roar of the bomber. Another pass. More bombs. More explosions. Depth charges detonate, sending shockwaves through the water, rattling U-156 to its core. Below decks, water begins to surge into the control room and bow compartments. The submarine is damaged. It cannot remain on the surface. Its ability to dive, its very survival, is compromised. Werner Hartenstein knows what he must do. His primary duty is to his own crew, to his vessel. With a heavy heart, he issues the agonizing command, cut the towlines. All survivors off the deck. Prepare to dive. German sailors, their faces grim, scramble to sever the ropes holding the lifeboats. The survivors on the deck are ordered into the water, forced to abandon the relative safety of the submarine for the vast, unforgiving ocean. Many protest, clinging to the rails, but the urgency in the German sailors' voices is unmistakable. Werner Hartenstein descends into the conning tower, his final glance at the chaotic scene on the surface. Splintered lifeboats, bodies floating in the oil-streaked water, the B-24 making another pass, strafing the area with machine gun fire. He pulls the hatch shut. The ballast tanks flood. Slowly, agonizingly, U-156 begins its descent, leaving behind the cries of those it had tried to save. The submarine disappears beneath the waves, a silent, gray ghost, abandoning the very humanity it had briefly embraced, forced back into the brutal, unforgiving logic of war. The Laconia incident leaves an indelible mark on the conduct of the U-boat war and international maritime law. The immediate historical impact is profound. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz's Laconia Order fundamentally alters German U-boat policy, officially ending humanitarian rescue attempts for the duration of the conflict. This directive, issued just 5 days after the sinking of the Laconia, transforms the nature of submarine warfare, removing the last vestiges of traditional maritime chivalry. While some U-boat commanders continued to offer aid in defiance of the order, it officially codified a more ruthless approach to survivors at sea. The long-term consequences of the Laconia incident echo through history, most notably at the Nuremberg trials after the war. Prosecutors formally charge Admiral Donitz with war crimes, citing the Laconia order as primary evidence that he intended to murder unarmed survivors. However, this prosecution strategy spectacularly backfires. Donitz's defense attorney calls American Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of U.S. forces in the Pacific, as a witness. Nimitz testifies that American submarines also engaged in similar unrestricted warfare, including actions that could be interpreted as leaving survivors to perish, particularly in the Pacific theater. This testimony weakens the prosecution's case against Donitz regarding the Laconia order, and he is ultimately acquitted on that specific charge, though he is convicted on others. The incident reveals the uncomfortable truth that all sides engaged in brutal tactics during total war. Werner Hartenstein, the central figure in this tragedy, does not survive the war. 6 months after the Laconia incident, on March 8, 1943, U-156 is sunk east of Barbados by depth charges from a US PBY Catalina patrol aircraft. All 53 crew members, including Corvettingkapitän Werner Hartenstein, perish. He dies at the age of 35, his act of humanity forever enshrined in naval history. The Laconia incident becomes a foundational case study in military ethics and the laws of armed conflict. Military lawyers today still study the events when teaching rules of engagement, emphasizing that vessels conducting rescue operations, even warships, cannot be attacked. In 1993, a Pentagon legal study of the Laconia incident concludes that Captain Robert C. Richardson III and Lieutenant James Hardin were both prima facie guilty of war crimes under international law for attacking U-156 during its rescue operation. The report states that Hardin's actions were inexcusable because he clearly saw the rescue operation underway. The most unexpected fact is perhaps how a single act of compassion, followed by a tragic misjudgment, ultimately led to a legal precedent that, decades later, would implicate the very forces that condemned the initial act. It is a stark reminder that in the fog of war, the lines between right and wrong, hero and villain, can become irrevocably blurred, leaving behind a complex legacy of human choice under unimaginable pressure. If this story moved you, if you think these men deserve to be remembered, leave one word in the comments: humanity. Subscribe for a new forgotten story every week.